Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on peers and sociocultural world. We'll explore how our peers, friendships, play, aging, and culture influence development from childhood through late adulthood. Peers are people who are about the same age or maturity level as us. They play a vital role by providing feedback and information about the world beyond the family. This influence can be both positive and negative, shaping our behaviors and social growth. Parents influence the peer groups children have access to through choices about where they live, which schools their children attend, and their own social networks. The relationship between parent and child also affects how children behave with their peers, while peers offer more equal, mutual social interactions. Children and adolescents interact with different types of peers: friends, acquaintances, cliques, crowds, and romantic partners. These interactions happen in various settings like school, neighborhoods, and even online. Each context provides unique social opportunities as well as challenges. Now, not all children experience peer relationships in the same way. Personal traits like shyness or being outgoing affects how easily a child forms friendships and ultimately is accepted by their peers. We refer to this as individual differences. If you've ever taken a personality class, you'll talk about this in great detail. By around age 3, children prefer to play with same-sex peers, and this preference continues until about age 12. Early childhood sees more rough and tumble play, but positive interactions increase over time. Elementary school children focus on reciprocal friendships, and in later childhood, peer groups grow larger and have less adult supervision. And you may remember this as you've grown up as well, right? As you get older, you had time with your friends that didn't necessarily have that same sort of watchful eye from your parents. Children process social situations by noticing social cues, interpreting others' intentions, setting goals, recalling behaviors, making decisions, and acting accordingly. Being able to regulate emotions effectively is essential to maintaining positive peer relationships. Arguably, we might even say that regulating emotions effectively is extremely important overall for our well-being in life, right? When we think about peer status categories, we might say that children fall into categories based on their peer acceptance. So, how popular they are, or if they're sort of average. We might also see peers that are neglected or rejected. And you might find peers that are controversial. These are children who are both liked and disliked by their peers. So they've got sort of this positive aspect about them that peers really like, but then there's also sort of this negative behavior that they evidence as well, which for some of their peers, right, is something that they dislike. And so you're not necessarily sure about this person. You like them, but you also dislike them. So we consider that to be sort of that controversial peer. So bullying is something that we see peaking specifically during adolescence. My graduate work and my master's thesis and dissertation actually focused on bullying. So this is an area that I'm very, very passionate about. Ultimately, we would say that bullying impacts or affects about 20 to 30% of youth, and it includes things like verbal abuse, rumors, cyberbullying, and the consequence from experiencing bullying can manifest as depression, suicidal thoughts, and behavioral problems. So we do know that successful anti-bullying programs can work by reducing opportunities for bullying. And so what we actually tend to find that's most effective in combating bullying is the people that we talk about as being bystanders. So if you've ever watched one of those videos online about a kid who's bullying another kid, all those kids that are watching that bullying interaction happen, that pull out their cell phones, that don't say anything or just there, those are what we refer to as bystanders. If we can get those bystanders to step up and say something, we actually can see a decrease in bullying behavior within a school. What we actually are tapping into then is when everyone around is saying, hey, stop it, that's not okay, that's not how you treat people, it actually ends up holding the bully accountable. And so they are more likely then to stop that behavior because they know it's not valued by the rest of their peers. Your book also talks about gender and its relationship to peer interactions. When we take a look at children in different play groups, we do see that there tends to be a strong gender segregation as we get older. We also see differences in how boys and girls might interact with their peers. So girls tend to focus on emotional intimacy and self-disclosure, while boys emphasize group activities and independence. And these differences influence friendship patterns throughout development, and we might even argue that we see these differences into later adulthood as well. Adolescents typically belong to cliques, and this is defined as small, tight-knit, usually same-sex groups, and also crowds. They belong to crowds as well, which are larger groups that are typically defined by reputation. Social media has significantly changed how adolescents interact, amplifying the intensity and immediacy of peer relationships. So any of us who have had friendships, who have been in middle school and high school, have also been introduced to concepts like peer pressure. What we actually find from the literature is that peer pressure peaks in early adolescence and can influence both positive and risky behaviors. Research shows us that parental involvement can help moderate these peer influences, reducing harmful behaviors like substance use, right? So our parents can substantially buffer that sort of negative peer interaction or peer influences. Friendships are extremely important, and they're extremely important throughout the lifespan. For human beings, friendships serve key functions. They provide companionship, they can provide stimulation, emotional support, social comparison, and even intimacy. These needs evolve but remain important across the lifespan. So, again, we might argue, or we do argue, that friendships are extremely important through us as we age and get older. They just tend to maybe look a little bit different as we do age. So, how does friendships then look across life or across the lifespan? In childhood, our friendships tend to be based on similarity in interests and values. As we move into adolescence, then we find that adolescents develop fewer but more intimate friendships involving deep self-disclosure, right? So we are telling very intimate details or aspects about ourselves to our friends as we move into into adolescence. In adulthood, friendships often integrate with family and romantic relationships. And in this case, it tends to focus more on quality than quantity. So you may have found that as you get older, you maybe don't have as many friends, but the quality of those friendships might be considered to be higher, right? That you know that these are people that you can count on. Play is very important for us as we develop. Play is actually very critical for cognitive, social, and emotional growth. And we see it taking on many forms. And we've kind of talked a little bit about some of these aspects with Piaget, right? When we talked about kind of sensory motor and practice play in infancy. But as we move throughout the lifespan, we see this play transitioning into symbolic and social play in early childhood, and then into structured games in later childhood. Unfortunately, this time for us just to engage in sort of free play has declined, which may impact children's development as a whole. So if you kind of think about, when you were younger, you had lots of time for sort of that kind of play, right? In elementary school or even in pre-K and kindergarten, you spent quite a bit of time playing. We call this recess, right? But as we age, we tend to have less of that time. By the time we move into high school, really the only amount of physical activity that we tend to have is during episodes of PE, right? And even this might vary. I remember in my high school, we only had to have, 2 classes of PE in 4 years. That really doesn't leave a lot of time then to kind of have this sort of free time or this free play time that we can interact with others or interact with objects and things, right? And so we really need to maybe think about the fact that we should continue to encourage that play, or at least time for some of that play throughout our lifespan. So what does sort of leisure activity look like as we develop? We know from the literature that adolescents spend nearly 6 hours a day on leisure activities, and half of that time involves screens. Structured leisure activities like sports and clubs are linked to better outcomes. Adults in midlife also benefit from leisure, and they see benefits to their health, and it's also helpful for easing into retirement, right? Or that transition into retirement. So really thinking about the ways that we engage in our leisure time, maybe not spending so much of that time with screens, but thinking about other ways that we can have that leisure time, right? Whether that be in sports or clubs or something like that. Socio-emotional selectivity theory suggests older adults focus more on emotionally meaningful relationships, and our activity theory states that staying socially and physically active promotes life satisfaction. And then disengagement theory sort of talks a little bit about that withdrawal is not necessarily as accepted as it once was in the literature. In fact, we kind of feel like it's largely outdated. So, unfortunately, ageism does occur in our society. And we define ageism as a prejudice against older adults. And this remains widespread in our culture and in our society. However, strong social support networks, or what we might call social convoys, improve older adults' mental and physical health. Older adults often report less loneliness because they selectively maintain close, rewarding relationships. So again, this is really hinting to us that having this good social support is very, very beneficial. Our culture also shapes our values and behaviors, and it tends to be passed from generation to generation. Socioeconomic status influences parenting and access to resources, and this in turn can affect children's development. Poverty, which we've kind of seen pop up in some of our other chapters, is linked to increased cognitive and emotional risks across the lifespan. And so I encourage you to spend a little bit of time here reading in your textbook how each of these facets are intertwined and relate then to our development. And then I kind of want to end this chapter where we talk about ethnicity and its relationship. We find that ethnic minority children often face challenges such as acculturation stress and discrimination. Bicultural identity helps balance heritage and the majority cultures. And here again, parents play an essential role in fostering ethnic pride and coping with racism. Media use affects development positively and negatively for all ages. And so our interaction with media can be both positive and negative. And here again, parental influence can be extremely powerful. So this gives us kind of a short, brief introduction to this chapter. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me and to voice those questions to me. I'm more than happy to help answer them. I hope you have enjoyed this chapter, and I look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions.